Hi, good morning. My name is Derek Brockbank. I am the Executive Director of Coastal States Organization, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the coastal states and how how the states can both serve as stakeholders in and of themselves, and how they can help support access to stakeholders in the way that Simone was just talking about. So first, just a quick overview of Coastal States Organization. We are a nonprofit that represents the 34 coastal states and territories in the United States with approved coastal zone management programs. So if you're thinking 34, that seems like an awful lot. We do include the Great Lakes as defined under the Coastal Zone Management Act, and the U.S. does have 5 island territories, 2 in the Caribbean and 3 in the Pacific, and so they also have coastal management programs. And so really CSO and the coastal zone management programs came out of the Coastal Zone Management Act, which was passed in 1972. Around the same time, a lot of the major environmental legislation was passed in the US, the Endangered Species Act, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act. Although I think it's notable that we don't consider the CZMA a specifically environmental bill, because it also specifically talks about sustainable economic development as one of the core missions of the coastal zone. So it's not a regulatory bill, it's not a you can't, it's a how we can do this better and how we can make sure the multiple uses of the coast are managed for the benefit of the public. So where is coastal management today? And this sort of gets into how CSO and states play a role. Today there are, as I mentioned, 34 programs in the 34 states and territories that have coastal zone management programs. Each state, as part of the Coastal Zone Management Act, was able to set up a program however they chose, right? It's a state-based initiative, and so these state programs all vary somewhat significantly. Many of them are housed within their state agencies, their state's Department of Natural Resources, but some are housed within the Department of Planning, some are housed within the governor's office. So each state has its own little niche of where its coastal program falls, and then within the coastal program, they all have different roles. So some of the big ones you might have heard of if you're working in California, the California Coastal Commission obviously is a very big influential player in the regulatory space. Other agencies, other state coastal management programs are much more about distributing funds. They collect funds and put out funds for research or local on-the-ground coastal projects. They can be regulatory, they can be funder-driven, they can be much more planning-driven, but there's a few sort of key things that they all have. They all develop sort of a core program management. They all develop what they call program enhancements, and so this is how they can advance coastal management in their state. They all deal with non-point pollution control, and the one I'm going to talk a little bit about is federal consistency, because I think that's really where it applies most to this community, because federal consistency means that under the Coastal Zone Management Act, states have the ability to respond to any federal action off of their coast, and this is really somewhat unique. If the federal government wants to develop an oil and gas project on BLM land, Bureau of Land Management land in Utah, Utah can't say no. That's federal land even though it's held within the state of Utah. That's different if it's off the coast. Off the coast, states do have an ability under the CZMA to review any federal action, and that federal action can include, direct federal action, Navy training exercises, to funding, any things that gets federal funding can be reviewed, to federal permitting. Again, this may be starting to be like, oh right, federal permitting, anything that gets needs a federal permit in coastal waters can be reviewed. And really, the idea is the federal consistency provision is intended to balance competing uses, right? So folks in this room, we're really trying to do ocean alkalinity enhancement, but the states are saying, okay, we also need to make sure that we've got working fisheries, we need public access, we need to manage people being able to get to places, we need to deal with environmental justice issues. So they're really looking at a broad scope of different things. And again, the challenge, particularly when you're looking at a nationwide process, is each state has its own set of programs, its own sort of important aspects. So again, federal consistency, it does allow states to have that ability to review any permit that happens in their waters. It's both and then I think also notably, people think, well, if it's in the coastal zone, yeah, that makes sense, but what if it's far out in the ocean, it's outside of those state waters? If there are reasonably foreseeable impacts to the coastal zone, even if the project is happening outside in federal waters, states can still review that. And they can either claim that, or they can set up a process called geographic location descriptions, GLDs, where they say anything that happens in this spot, even though it's off of our state waters, anything that happens in there, we're still going to review because we know that migratory fish or something or migratory mammals will flow through that and will impact us. So as you're developing projects off of a coast, you know, you want to make sure you're keeping an eye out for that and thinking about how states have a role. And then the other piece, again, was just also that states know their communities, right? So I talked about the regulatory thing. All states manage federal consistency, but states are also putting money out into the communities. They're engaging with their communities. These are just a couple different, you know, states of the 4 of the 34 states and how they engage. So they are doing public meeting sessions. They are doing on-the-ground site visits. They're talking to their communities. They're putting money out into their communities. And so if you're looking at doing a project, one of the quickest ways to sort of get a lay of the land of what community input is going to be needed is going and having some of those early conversations with the state. So they can be sort of a quick one-stop shop, and engaging them, learning from them, having them be part of your engagement process can also be very helpful. But even if they're not actively doing that engagement, just getting a sense of how they can be, of what, you know, what some of the key issues in that state might be. The states are a good way to do it. So with that, I guess we're not going to take questions now, but we'll have a chance for questions later. So thank you.